by the ways these global, it was just a good reminder to me about the Cold War and how it allowed a kind of alternate network. So, you know, you've got these Chinese and Cuban doctors in Algeria. You get, you know, the Panthers who can't fly to, you know, the United States and Europe. In Western Europe, they can fly. You know, they go down to Brazzaville and then they fly back via Moscow to Algiers. It's just, you know, there was you know, obviously there were lots of issues with that kind of bipolar world, but it did offer these activists alternative channels that again, the intimate history allows you to kind of think about what this meant. I loved all the details about the kind of logistics of global struggle, and that was and communications and travel, and that was one of the things that came up. Those kind of travel details were interesting to me.
For me, the most important paragraph that captured everything, and also kind of the link between the intimate moments plus the global order and third worldism and all of that, is when she was describing the stuff she left in her apartment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's for me. That's wow. Very, very powerful. On another note, speaking about all those connections, as you know, as for me, looking at kind of South-South relations, but within, let's say, within North Africa, all the way, let's say, to Lebanon, Palestine, etc. For me, that was missing. And I'm like, I know a lot about the rest of the world, but like, where are the Egyptians? Where are the Palestinians? Where are the Syrians in what was going on in Algeria? At some point, like, you feel Algeria is just connected to, let's say, Latin America and Africa. For me, like, tell me who was there among the other groups.
Yeah. I think I also, I just wondered about the ways that, I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing, really. She's constantly moving and traveling, and people are so, like, there's no internet, like, people are so connected, and I had a real sense of, you know, there's telecommunications and there's press, but it seems kind of disproportionately dizzying, like how much they're moving and how much they are connected and how much they are aware of what's happening in other places. Sometimes not. She'll mention that someone hadn't heard about something yet, but I had no idea the kind of extent of the travel that was happening in this period of time. And he has to fly, you know, and then we're going to send her to North Korea, and then we're going to, it's really quite dizzying. I guess the last big thing, something that Muriam said, is connected to this or leads us into this. Oh, this is the inside of the Afro-American Cultural Center. It's kind of a weird perspective on but these posters and the things that they were kind of distributing in terms of information. Speaking of space. I guess I wanted to...
Didn't mean to.
No, it's good. It's a segue. So to just make that connection, you know, one of the reasons I really wanted us all to read this book had to do with what it might mean to read it now, right? And to think about the way that the history of these movements that she engages in this book, I don't want to say lessons, because that's sort of a tiresome thing to do, but how they hold inspiration for contemporary movements and politics. You know, I was looking at, you know, images from Black Lives Matter, and this one really struck me, this image of Linda Sarsour at a rally in support of Colin Kaepernick in New York in 2017, just thinking about cross-community connections, the women's movement, you know, Muslim Americans, Black Americans, and then here an image from I've got my lower and upper cases mixed up, sorry guys. My Black Lives Matter here at the Vancouver Art Gallery, and that kind of, just a big question, I guess, about the ways that contemporary movements seize on this history, use it, learn from it, use its symbols, and engage with it. And then here's Algiers. I don't know if this was yesterday or 2 days ago, but it's one of the images I found. I mean, this is happening right at this moment, so, and I know that Muriam is really engaged with that history. so yeah, I wanted to have a kind of broad question about then and now, what we do with the memory of these events that Mokhtefi engages in the book, and how contemporary movements are using these historical pasts of these different movements in the present. Muriam, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I don't really want to weigh in on Algeria right now because this will go on the record and I'll have gotten everything wrong. I'll be that person who said this was going to happen and then nothing happened. But I think it's wonderful, given how connected we are in a very different way, to say there are all of these groups who are learning from each other and you know, following each other on Twitter. But I also think there's a cautionary tale here in terms of how much movements didn't get each other. And when I see Algeria in 2019 with an enormous racism problem vis-a-vis Black Africa and migrants who are trying to get across the Mediterranean, for example, right, kind of the threats of solidarities that are foreclosed by certain things, I think is important. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to, of course, I think all of these radical movements should try to be in conversation, but I think also to take seriously when forms of solidarity are not possible either because of the reality of the current moment or kind of the politics of the possible. And so I think there's a question of what revolutionary conversations cannot look like as well. That's important to keep in mind.
Okay. Kind of, in terms of what's going on now, if we learned anything from the previous years with the Arab uprisings, is to read things in a very cautious way, and also, not to expect revolutionary outcomes from a revolutionary moment in terms of what's going on now. In Algeria, this may disappear in a week, depending on how they solve what's going on. It may keep going on. For me, what's interesting is in the context of the Arab uprisings, Algeria was kind of like the exception, because things weren't happening at the same scale that they were happening in Tunisia or Libya or Syria or Egypt. And now it's the other side of the story. You have this going on in Algeria and not going on in the other countries. So kind of, there's the connection to the past, how we read it, but there's also the connection to the moment and to the rest of the region. In terms of where this is coming from, I was there about a year ago, and again, as you said, we have to be very careful. You wouldn't expect this to be happening at all. I mean, the talk was about how to change the economy. It was very clear that the oil economy moment is disappearing and they need to move somewhere else. For me, it felt more like there's a dialogue going on. And this was also kind of surprising. But again, where it goes, we can't tell, or we shouldn't.
One thing that I appreciate about her is there's a kind of sophistication and pragmatism. Like, it's just sort of like this, like a functionary in this global struggle, but she seems to understand social movements, their dynamics. She has, she can't know every place in the world, but she has a rather sophisticated understanding of different places in the world, different cultural contexts, and yet still, like when she goes back to the United States, she recognizes that moment for the Black Panthers is over. So I think it's a story about how, she's devoted her life to a certain kind of post-colonial struggle, the ideal of which was not achieved. And I think it's a good story about the real challenges and the challenges that happen at that intimate scale, right? That aren't just about economics or high politics, but about intimate relationships and the problems of human beings working together, really, I guess.
Adam, do you want to speak
Sure.
to this?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of, it's interesting, especially what I kept thinking about was why I hadn't thought more about Black Panthers in Algeria before. Do you know what I mean? Because as a North American Black person, your world can be small to a degree, right? Unless you have parents who are worldly or whatever, you don't really think about the ways in which, you know, actually what was surprising for me in the book was, you know, the different people that were coming through, like Carmichael and all these different kind of individuals who I'd never really thought of as people who traveled. I think of them as being African American. And so that was kind of a huge thing for me because, in fact, I mean, I think about Black people in you know, Paris or something because it's so often talked about. But in terms of lessons and in terms of, I suppose, being in Vancouver, it's very multicultural. Right now I'm at a school where it's mostly, you know, Asians and from South Asia and also from, you know, Vietnam and these places, and students from Zimbabwe and North Africa and Yemen, and it's I guess one of the things I saw in the book was how I liked that there was just forward movement with the people. They were working together and they were accomplishing certain things, but at the same time, and obviously it's looking back, it seemed doomed the entire time. Do you know what I mean? Because even if they were to achieve things, at some point they would have to work out all the conflicts that are present between them. Do you know what I mean? Which even in the Black community are almost insurmountable at times. So there was that. I mean, it was difficult not to be inspired by how much had been achieved, but then at the same time, I'm looking around at my sort of context and thinking about the ways in which, you know, the Hogan Society, for example, you know, and trying to reclaim Black space and the struggles that we have, and the fact that we seem to have learned very little from this time. Do you know what I mean? Not a lot of it is actually carried over. And certainly, I wonder how many of the conversations have actually progressed very much. I see a lot of mixing now, which is great. But in terms of thinking about things racially, I'm not sure. Maybe it would be better if we had less race analysis and more working together, which is something I would have never thought of before. Because what I see is the emergence of really strong identity politics. You know, people really talking about, to personalize it so I don't have to point fingers. We have a lot of Black power talk in my community, and I always joke about when's it going to come time that I don't meet the blood quota. You know what I mean? So when am I going to be slated to be shipped off to the camps because I'm not Black enough? Because in North America, of course, I'm always just assumed to be Black, but that's, you know, if we're being generous, it's half of my experience, which is a lot. I have white ancestry too, of course. So there's all these very complicated sort of questions that I could see sort of, you know, coming in with all these people mixing and, you know, doing things and accomplishing things, and it led me to think more about how much was actually being achieved. What would have happened if, you know, Cleaver would have been able to actualize his vision in the world, and he would have got to some place where he could say, oh yeah, we've gotten there. I wonder who would start kind of killing each other at that point, you know what I mean? Because there's so many things that are left unresolved. Well, I haven't seen very many revolutionary movements that come to an end and everyone's happy.
There is a kind of, what you just said, Adam, made me think that there's a kind of nostalgic tinge to this book and a kind of melancholy about the kind of the rifts and the falling away of the possibilities that were in this moment. And it's one that characterizes other histories and accounts of this period. And so, yeah, I guess this last question for me is kind of about, like, why write this book now? I mean, Mokhtefi is, what is she, 90 now? It's the time, if she's going to write a memoir, it's now. So there's a kind of banal response to that. Why write this book now? But also, you know, it seems to me that these accounts and accounts of this moment and this political moment is very popular right now, right? people are really